Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is really great to have you here. We're going to begin in just a couple of minutes. I know it's right at 4 o'clock, but I want to make sure that we give everyone a chance to get logged in and get going here. And then we have a great group and a great panel today, so I'm really looking forward to this discussion. But we'll begin here in just another minute or so. It looks like all of our panelists are ready to go. Anybody have any last minute questions before we get going on your end? We're all set? Thumbs up, we're all set. Okay. We're all good there. Excellent, excellent. And I do see that there is someone has risen their hand, and so if you Becky, if you let's look at you have your hand raised. I don't know if there's a question that you have. If you do, if you can put that into the question box, and then I can address that. Or if it just by accident, then just click the little hand button again, and that'll take it down. Just want to make sure that we're not missing something there. So in celebration of, a great day, an International Women's Day, March 8th, this is for, Women's Month. And I think this is really a great opportunity for us to really raise the awareness of the women, the importance of women in our lives. And for me personally, this is something that is really special to me because a little known fact, you're going to learn about little known facts about each of us today, but a little known fact about me is that I grew up with 5 sisters. And my dad traveled a lot when I was growing up. So it was primarily growing up, it was my 5 sisters, my mom, her 2 aunts, so it was my great aunts. And then usually I had 1 or 2 of my sister's friends were living with us at the same time as well. So I remember at one point in my life, there were 8 women in the household that I was living in, and I was the only male in the household. And so they gave me the garage as my domain. And so that was great. I lived in the garage, I slept in the garage. It was a great place to be. But I do remember that very, very well. And, so when I think of women in my life, it's all my sisters who continually remind me of how important I am. No, I'm just kidding. Continually remind me of, to listen to my wife. So it's really a great opportunity for us to be here to celebrate, again, the women in our life. And so I have a great group of panelists as we get together and talk today. Well, my name is George Fernandez. I'm the Vice President of Practice Management here at Mariner Wealth Advisors. And Mariner Wealth Advisors, we are a registered investment advisory firm that helps our clients do 2 very important things: discover the importance of money in their life and discover what's most important in their life, and how do we connect those 2 activities throughout our lives so that we become advocates for our clients. And to do that, one of the ways we do that is to get to know who you are as clients, who you are and what's most important to you. And the folks that are on the call today are folks that are on the ground floor every single day doing this. And so it's really great to have everyone here. So Jana Shoulders will be our moderator for the call today. I will be sitting in the background, kind of looking at the questions as they come in. So if you do have a question, I encourage you to put that into the question box. Please note that there is a question box and a chat box. Put the questions in the question box so we know who they belong to. And if you happen to put it in the chat box and we don't get to it, just go down and just copy and paste that back up into the question box. I will be bringing those questions up to the group throughout the call today. And then we'll have a special time at the very end to answer questions that you have along the way. So with all of that said, I'm going to turn this over to Jana Shoulders, who will introduce herself and then our panelists. So Jana, thanks again for taking us on this journey today.
Thank you, George. I can't think of any way I would rather spend International Women's Day than facilitating a good conversation with these fine folks about how we can help women up their game. My role at Mariner is to be a managing director, and that means I get to work with lots of different people, both at the advisor level and client level. So it's a real privilege for me to get to help these ladies share their expertise and why they are so very passionate about what they do. Joining me are Megan Brozowski. Megan is a CFP, Certified Financial Planner, a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. She has an economics degree from St. Lawrence University. And a fun fact about Megan is she's the manager for the New Jersey Colonials boys ice hockey team. I'm sure she could enlighten us a lot about some pretty cool and fun stories about that. We also have Valerie Escobar, who is also a certified financial planner. Valerie is a graduate of Virginia Tech. She has a bachelor's in international business, cum laude. She is the den leader of her son Logan's Cub Scout troop and an avid yogi. We also have Mindy McLaughlin, who is also a certified financial planner. Mindy has a bachelor's in finance and economics with honors from Miami University and an MBA from the University of Cincinnati. She's a travel junkie, which may not sound all that unusual, but she's a travel junkie in spite of the fact that she has to take Dramamine to be one. So that means she really likes to travel. Okay, we should get started, don't you think? Valerie, can you walk us through why women's issues are so unique and challenging and why we need to be having this conversation?
Absolutely. Of course, all groups of people, any individual has their own, obstacles, things that they're going to confront. Women's issues have a special place in my heart just because of my mom. Grew up with a single mom, an immigrant. We came from El Salvador, and so having a second language plus a degree, education that doesn't actually count in this country, all made for a really difficult time for her. And I just grew up feeling that I wanted to help other women that were in that same situation not have to, confront it in that same way, and being better educated and having a way to conquer those issues just was the motivation for being in this career. And so when we think of women, there are lots of issues that are biologically or statistically attributed to us. For example, women live longer. The longer you live, the more money it costs. If a woman had a male partner throughout their life, then there's a good chance that that partner won't be there near the end. Another issue is that women, are anywhere from 2 to 4 times more likely to be caretakers. So either leave the workforce for children or to take care of parents. And so that makes it hard to meet financial goals if there's not an income. One of the last things I think that is really working against women is just that the wage gap issue. Women tend to, they have degrees and a higher rate actually than men, but then they go into the workforce and get jobs that are equivalent to their male peers, but are paid less. And so all of those things are just really unique, and they can be addressed, which is why I think it's so exciting to work here with all these other women that do have answers to those problems.
Good backdrop, and lots of work we need to do to compensate or make up for that, don't we?
Absolutely.
So, Mindy, we hear the term sandwich generation, and that typically refers to women, doesn't it? Helping their parents and their children at the same time. Can you talk about this a little bit and maybe give us some coping tips?
Sure. I think I fall into that. So I have 3 children. My 2 older children are now out on their own, but as anyone who's walked in my shoes before knows, it doesn't stop there. They're still calling mom to talk about things like getting married or buying their first home and that type of thing. My 3rd child went off to college last year, and I was so excited because I thought I was finally going to get a little bit of my life back. And then all of a sudden, COVID hit, and he has been back and forth multiple times over the last year and a half. But I'm looking forward to a little break at some point. But so that's on the one end of the sandwich, if you will. And then, of course, there's life and working and that type of thing that takes a lot of my time. But then on the other end, and this is a kind of a newer thing for me, both sets of my parents and my husband's parents are alive, thankfully, but they're all in their 80s. And as we've all heard and seen, and now I'm finding, that presents its own challenges. So, they're talking about, moving, and they need help around the house. And sometimes, there are medical issues, whether that's taking them to the doctor or advocating for them, just kind of trying to better understand the situation that they're in and so forth. And certainly with COVID, I would say for both ends of the sandwich, if you will, one of the things that I found is critical that I would encourage everyone to do is make sure that you have got healthcare and financial powers of attorney for not only your parents and so forth to help them, but also children over age 18, because the doctors and so forth, they won't talk to you. So that's very critical and easy to do. But I think that's very important to get that taken care of. And I know Megan is going to talk a little bit about some other things relating to working with your parents and planning with your parents. And I'm also going to be talking a little bit about long-term care as we go along. But it's women have a lot on their plate. One of the things I know collectively we've spoken about and often counsel or mentor younger women or women that are struggling to kind of balance all of these things. It's really tough to do it all. And I'd be kidding you if I said I could do it all. It's important to get some help. But one of the things that we want to just make sure, certainly in light of the day we're celebrating today, is often women, as Valerie mentioned, are the caregivers and so forth. But before you step away from a job or a working opportunity that's providing income for your family, you really need to think about everything. It's not just the lost wages, but also, many companies pay for health care. They often provide a stipend or some allocation into like a health savings account. Certainly there's the 401k matches. And then the biggest thing really that we've been talking about certainly over the past year is what I would just call relevancy. This day and age, if you step away and with the intention of coming back later, that could be really difficult because with technological innovation, things are moving at a pretty rapid clip. And, I know myself personally, I've had to really up my game in terms of software and tools and those types of things. And that's a blessing and a curse, because I do think for some women now today, because of technology, it is easier to still keep your foot in the door. Maybe you can't do full time, but I know a lot of places that offer job share or a part-time type of an approach. And we would really encourage women to the extent that you can. And obviously this is a personal decision, but because of the relevancy factor, as well as the hit that you can take to your financial situation, we would encourage you to explore that. And, we've found, and the studies would bear this out, I know Valerie's done some research on this too, women are coming out of college, I think in many cases with higher degrees or more degrees even than men. And there's a lot they can add, I think, to the equation. So, really know your worth and advocate for yourself.
Oh, I like that. Stay in the game if at all possible. And it kind of goes with that old adage, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Ask them if you can't have a little more flexibility or go part-time. Thanks, Mindy. Megan, two of the most stressful events a woman can face are divorce and death. Can you walk us through those life events and some actions to take or avoid?
Sure. And I think from what Valerie and Mindy were saying before, statistics show that whether we want to or not, women are gonna outlive men statistically. And even if you don't want to take care of finances, you may be forced into it later on in life. So a couple differences. So with divorce, whether you're the one initiating the divorce or your spouse is initiating, it kind of puts you in a different situation. Working with a lot of women that have come in, they weren't the ones realizing, or they weren't the ones initiating, and just kind of the deer in headlights, where do I start? And this started for me about 20 years ago when my parents were in that situation. My mom, my parents were married 25 years and my dad initiated a divorce, and my mom just was completely blindsided, had absolutely no idea. And that's what kind of got me in saying, okay, Mom, I'm going to help you. We're going to get through this together. So, going through both situations, through death and divorce, I always say build a good team, because there are a lot of things that need to be taken care of, and it can be very overwhelming. So my number one recommendation is to get a therapist, of course. I'm happy to listen to everyone, but really just, whether it's dealing with a loss of a spouse through death or just anger, and how do I tell the kids that, hey, we're getting divorced? Having someone on your side to coach you through that. A question I get is, okay, I'm going through a divorce. I have no idea where anything is. Where do I start? And just one simple thing is, okay, if you can find me last year's tax return, it makes it kind of seem very overwhelming, but at least, does my husband have those hidden bank accounts? Well, the tax return will let us know if there are any hidden bank accounts. And then on the when dealing through with the death, I was working with someone who her husband had taken care of all the finances, and on his deathbed said, "I have all these passwords that I need to tell you." And it took her 6 months to find everything. And part of that problem was she was never listed as a beneficiary. So it had to go to the estate, and it was just a big mess. So some tips that I would recommend is to be at the table. Even, hope everyone's happily married, doing great, but someday you may be at the point where in your 90s and your husband passes away. So be at the table, know where everything is. No passwords. I know these days it's difficult with the 2-factor authentication, and you have to do all that, but have a spreadsheet showing where things are and what the passwords are. And then also, and I said, build a team around, just to help you get through those first couple steps, because it can be overwhelming. But what I've told women going through these transitions is that, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It may take you a while to get there, but you'll be okay at the end. And having that team and helping people financially kind of get to that point is very helpful. So those would be kind of my, know your passwords, know where a tax return is, and just be at the table now, so that when you're at that situation later in life, you're aware.
Oh, good advice. And as a former tax person, I would also tell you, none of these just sign here, baby moments. You should know what you're signing. And even if you don't understand that tax return, you can have a pretty good feel for what's there, at least at a 30,000 feet level. So get your head in the game. You're so right. Okay. Mindy, you mentioned long-term care. Talk a little bit about how somebody decides if they need it. When is it appropriate? What are some guidelines there?
Sure. Yeah, this probably comes up, I would say, almost in every meeting. It's a hot topic. It's getting a little more play in the media, certainly as baby boomers are retiring and people are living longer and so forth. But long-term care, kind of the rule of thumb in terms of whether you needed it or not, used to be if you had assets below $1.5 million to 2 million, that was often the time where you might want to explore it. Now, I would make the case, based on my experience, that it's a very personal decision, and it really depends on what your legacy goals are. I have a lot of clients who own long-term care policies that have way north of $2 million in assets, and the opposite is true. I have some clients that want to be spending their last dollar on the way out, and they don't really care about leaving much of a legacy. But so it's a very personal decision. But a couple of facts, I think nationally today, and again, this is a moving target, but the average cost of care for long-term care is about $7,000 per month, or well north of $80,000 a year. If you need care. So it's expensive. We're talking big dollars here. And I think the average time, and again, you've got a huge range here, but typically what the averages would say is that men would need that for about 11 months, and women would need that long-term care for about 18 months on average. So, it's often not as long as you might think, but again, there are plenty of examples that would show longer time frames. Now, certainly a big thing that comes up that we always like to mention to our clients is whether or not there's a history of dementia or Alzheimer's in the family, because those are very long-term illnesses. And if anyone has been through that with a loved one before, that it's devastating on a lot of fronts, especially financially. And so, when we talk to clients about when is the best time to buy that, generally speaking, the pricing is going to be much more reasonable when you're younger and in better health. So, I think in a perfect world, perhaps in your 50s, you might start to explore that. Now, the issue with that is, and many people in their 50s still have kids going to college, and, there's a lot of big ticket items that you're paying for and so forth. So oftentimes that's not something that they deem affordable at that time. The problem is the older you get, it becomes more expensive. And certainly once you've had some kind of a chronic illness manifest itself, if you have a heart condition or some other things that come into play, then those policies can be very expensive. What we've found is that over the years, and I've seen this in my career, these long-term care policies have gotten a little better. There are what we call hybrid policies available now. It used to be if you had a long-term care policy and you never tapped into it, once you passed, it was gone. There was no benefit. The money, it was a sunk cost. But now there are some hybrid policies that attach a life insurance rider to them, such that if you don't use the long-term care benefit, when you pass, there can be some assets monetized and a life insurance death benefit to your heirs. So that is absolutely worth exploring. I think, and honestly, what a lot of people will do when we meet with clients, we always run financial projections. We look at all their sources of income and expenses, talk a lot about lifestyle, and then really you have those hard discussions about, okay, how are you going to protect yourself? What's important to you? And many times people will carve out a certain dollar amount that's allocated for those types of things. And so you may self-insure part of it, but then perhaps have a policy to cover part of the benefit. So, it's critical, I think, that clients or prospective clients come to someone like us at Mariner, who we are a fiduciary. We are always going to give you our best advice, acting in your best interest. And I think that's really critical because, it's an expensive policy. And I'm not going to lie, I've seen those premiums increase to the statutory maximum pretty regularly because long-term care, health costs are rising. So, but it's very important, I think, to look at that. And there are some new alternatives now, which make it, I think, more affordable for many people.
That's encouraging and good advice. Thank you, Mindy. So you mentioned college and saving for college. Valerie, talk to us a little bit about that and just what are college savings plans?
Yeah, so there's so many different ways to save for college. 529s come to mind as the most popular kind, that it allows you to have some state deductions depending on where you live, but then also grow that money tax-free and have the distributions available tax-free for college-related expenses. With recent tax changes, even private education, like high schools, elementary schools, can be covered by those 529s. But when having those college expense education conversations, I think it's really important that you and your children are, frankly, looking at college as an investment. It's not simply that, by rite of passage, you will go to a school and get a degree and that'll be that, because the truth is there is a cost to get what the final degree is. And if you're spending $400,000 or $500,000 to perhaps get it, into a career field that pays you $20,000 a year, is that really the kind of return that you're looking for? And then also remembering that parents are going to have to retire one day, right? And you can't finance your retirement, whereas children are able to finance their education. That's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. But keeping that in mind, that probably your children would rather pay for their school loans than having to pay for your long-term care. As a parent, I definitely don't want my son paying for me in my old age. And so and there's so many ways and so many things that come to mind. Like my son is 8. I have no idea. I think he's extremely bright and studious sometimes. But the truth is we don't know, right? So there's just so many options that you can save outside of a 529 and just having flexibility. And so that's why that conversation with your planner, I think, comes to mind and is so important.
Good to get a thinking partner on those topics, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this sandwich generation world we're in, and Megan, help us with how we can get everybody to get their parents' house in order and have that tough conversation. What words of wisdom you have there?
Sure. So it's interesting looking at the different age groups. So working with younger clients, when building out their financial plans and saying, okay, well, whether you're saving for your kids' college or you're saving to buy the second house or whatever their situation is, one of the questions is, are your parents financially stable? Do you need to help them later on? So that kind of forces kids, I say kids, 30s, 40s, 50s, to have the conversation with their parents to say, hey, mom, dad, I'm doing my own, family financial plan. Are you guys okay? Are you going to need help down the road? And just asking it, having that conversation so that, hopefully it's a little less awkward because you're focusing on yourself and wondering if, do I need to plan to help you guys down the road? And then on the flip side, for clients that are, have their kids, the kids are 30s and 40s and 50s, and it used to be where the parents did not let their kids know about their assets.
Right.
I think that's changing now because of their family personal situations where you've gone through something and I had no idea what mom and dad had. It was a nightmare. I'm not going to put my kids through that same situation. So, whether it's I had a client who didn't have any kids, but she was leaving all her assets to her nieces and nephews, she actually left a Post-it and said, call Megan. She can help walk you through everything. So, it's something as simple as that. I maybe recommend to do something a little bit more formal, but it worked. The niece called me up and said, hi, my aunt said, call you. She just passed away. And I was like, oh, God. And also I was also in a situation where the siblings got along, working with an older client, siblings or older person, siblings got along, and but the daughter-in-law was the issue, so there was some tension. So we ended up having a sit-down meeting and just saying, here's everything that mom has, so everyone was aware. So it just it's having the conversation depending on what situation you're in.
Yeah, and it's nice to have a financial planner advisor to facilitate and kind of take the emotions out and keep it at a higher level, isn't it? Yeah. I love it. And when you ask your parents if they're going to need help, and if they say no, can you prove it? Can you show me? Well, we've done a lot of good planning topic discussion. How about we talk about investing? Either just how do we get started, investing 101? Valerie, why don't you launch us?
Yeah, absolutely. The main way, well, I should say there's really three big things that I would say are the most basic, simplest, and hardest pieces of investing advice. The first one is start now. Don't try and guess when the best perfect time is. Start now. Time is always going to be your biggest advocate. Compounding interest and there's just a lot of science and research that goes behind it. But starting now is the best way to do it. A lot of people will have a retirement plan at their work. So either a 401k, a 403b, 457. There's so many different ways to get invested. So either at work, you can start deferring money from your paycheck. We always recommend that you at least take the free money your employer is giving you as far as whatever they're matching, but generally you're going to need to save a lot more. The second thing is stay diversified, which means invest in a little bit of everything. Being successful as an investor does not mean trying to pick which is the next Tesla stock. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Oftentimes in retirement plans, there are what's called target date funds. So it's simple as saying, I'm going to retire this date, I'm going to invest there. It's not, it's a great way to start. If you work with a planner, they can help you create a diverse portfolio, but keeping it diverse is extremely important. And the third thing that I would say is to stay the course. Emotionally, we can get distressed when the markets are going up and down. I would say that women have the advantage of being really good investors because a lot of times they're just not paying attention to what's going on in the investing world because they're busy. We've got so many things to do. And that's great. The last thing we want is for our clients stressing out about that because we're the stressor and we're going to stress on it for you.
Yes. And they do say that you can do more damage by moving too quickly and too often. than by sitting tight, right, friends?
Absolutely. And last year was just the year just a case study of, it was fast and furious on the way down. And then all of a sudden it recovered. Nobody was guessing those exact dates. And so the most successful investors last year did nothing.
So you mentioned volatility, and to me that brings up the topic of risk reward. So Mindy, when we say risk reward, what are we talking about?
That is really an important topic, especially now. Usually you talk about risk in terms of, I guess the old adage was women are much more conservative, risk averse. They didn't want to take risk. But the reality is, in this environment we're living in today, you really have to take some risk. So let me back up a minute. So the riskiest assets, I should say that stocks are viewed as riskier than bonds. I think everybody knows that. But today, if you have paid attention to your bank account lately, you know that you're not getting paid much interest by staying in cash or by staying in CDs or savings accounts, money markets, any of that. And what's happened is because of the pandemic and what the Fed has done, interest rates even on bonds, which typically, can be, at least the kind of bonds we buy, very high quality conservative investments, those aren't in many cases even keeping up with inflation. So when we talk about risk and reward, we want to make sure that investors understand that one of the risks is keeping up with inflation. And so in this environment, you really do need to have exposure to stocks or equities. And one of the things, and I think Valerie just mentioned it, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to put all your money on Tesla or SolarEdge, or we've all heard the stories lately about GameStop and what was happening with that and so forth and how volatile it was. What we're talking about with our clients is creating a plan, a disciplined plan. And as Valerie said, it's one where you generally stay the course because your return can be cut in half if you miss, the 5 best trading days in a very long-term time frame. So, we are looking at high quality companies. In many cases, it's very practical and possible to find high quality stocks that pay a nice dividend that will grow over time, that can really keep up with inflation and give you some growth, because as we've been discussing, in many cases, women have not saved enough, or they haven't taken enough risk or been in the more growth-oriented assets, and they live longer. So we need to really start early and save often. I always tell, I've told this to my kids, I tell this to clients, pay yourself first. If you're working, pay yourself, and you do that by saving in your 401k plan. Certainly, as Valerie mentioned, at least to the extent where you're going to get the match that the company's given you. But in many cases, women aren't really they don't even know to the extent that they can save, and they can put a lot more away. And the studies would show over time, if you do that at an early age, you can amass quite a lot of wealth down the line, and especially if you invest with a nice mix of growth, stocks as well as more conservative investments. But I think Valerie also mentioned it's important to be diversified, and that's a hallmark of our process. We are absolutely long-term investors, and we are taking a look at what's happening in the economy and trying to guide our clients through that. But it's very important to, just because women say they're conservative, I think oftentimes that's because they don't understand stocks and so forth. And it's not anything to be afraid of. It's a great investment that can really serve you well over the long term.
Words of wisdom. Megan, anything you might care to add?
One thing that I've noticed, it's called with working with clients, especially women, the sleep at night factor, where, there's enough going on in the world that you want to be able to sleep at night, and then to have your investments when, the market goes down. So one thing I've worked with clients is saying, hey, you know what, let's take a little bit more risk if you're comfortable with that in your portfolio. but let's keep maybe 12 to 18 months worth of living expenses on the side, so you know that you can still, you have money there when the market is going down, and the next time it will go down, because that's how markets work. That has helped a lot of women that I work with give that sleep at night factor, knowing that you do have some, cash on the side, along with a riskier portfolio.
That too is very wise. Okay, I was supposed to be reminding everybody that if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Our friend George is monitoring that, and we'll be bringing them to us. And I'd like to move to our last structured question, which is, do you know what your most valuable asset is? It's you. It's you, your earning potential. It is your capacity to make things happen. And I think that's probably the least focused on part of our lives. So as we talk about knowing your value, Valerie, you want to launch our conversation in this area. How can we be advocates for ourselves?
Yeah, I think one of the top ways to do that is first understand what you're trying to accomplish. I know, as personally, sometimes I have trouble arguing for myself because I don't necessarily think that I'm providing something. But if we sit down with clients, and often we say, well, these are my goals, and these are very reasonable goals. They want to always have a roof over their heads. They want to be able to never eat cat food. They want to, feed their children. These are very reasonable goals, but to achieve those goals, it's going to require most of the time an income from somewhere. And so when we sit down, we say, these are our goals. This is how we're going to get there. This is when we want to get there. Now, what is that income that's required to achieve those goals? What kind of benefits do you need to have from your employer in order to do those? Having that number in mind, I think, is a powerful weapon that a woman can walk into a potential employer, perhaps their current employer, and say, this is what I need. This is what I think I deserve. Because I know for me, I have an easier time fighting for someone else than I do for myself. And so with those goals, I can say, I'm actually coming here talking to my employer on behalf of my son, of my family, of people that I love and care for. So that's where I would, the top place to really remember your own value.
Megan, Mindy?
And I think know your value. I think know what you're good at and know where you need help. And this has been brought up a couple of times, and I'm totally guilty of this myself. It's okay to ask for help. You don't need to figure it out all on your own. And again, I need to write that. I'm writing down that for myself. But know what you know and know what you don't know. It's all about self-awareness. So that's really something powerful.
I was just going to add, I've read this before, and I think this applies to me personally, or has in my career. Women tend to, certainly if you're going for a promotion or the next job or whatever, we tend to feel like we have to have everything, basically like we've already done the job for 10 years before we would go into it. And that's, men have a tendency to be a little more, I don't know what the right word is. I don't want to say aggressive.
They wing it.
They wing it. Yeah, they wing it. And they go for it.
Don't meet the qualifications, they wing it.
Yes, and I think we need to be a little more assertive, as Valerie said, and oftentimes I do think women in the workforce, there's such an incredible balance when you have more diversity. I've seen that play out. Better decisions are made. You're more long-term focused. There's just a balance there, and I think we need to give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. As mentioned earlier, we've got the education, we've got the experience. We just need to take that next step and go for it and put ourselves into those situations. And I do think that that's some of the part, there aren't enough women in the boardroom right now. And it's not, I don't think that they're not capable. I think it's a combination of things as to why we're not there. But I think if we take that step and advocate for ourselves, and, we're doing the work and we're capable of the work.
Words of wisdom for sure. George, would you like to share any questions that you've captured in our time period here?
First of all, let me unmute my microphone.
Yes. Well, there's always
So,
somebody who does that once. Thanks. You've taken care of that for us.
exactly. So first of all, I guess what I'd like to say, just say thank you to everybody who's you've been enjoying the conversation today, and I have a few thoughts here that I want to share. But just to get to a couple of questions, one of the questions that came up a little bit earlier regarding the death of a spouse is, you think about the emotional side of what's happening, when you lose your spouse, and we want to be sensitive to not doing things too quickly. We want to be sensitive to not doing things too slowly. So what does that look like? What's the appropriate, time to start to having those conversations, discussions?
Megan, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think is this when someone has passed away? I mean, is that kind of the question? Because it's, it all depends. I mean, and that's not a great answer to give, but some when a spouse comes in and they're just completely emotionally overwhelmed, there's no way you can say, okay, you need to go to the court and get the testamentary letters. I mean, you just can't have that conversation at that point. So, or if there's, it's tough to say. It kind of depends. If it's a sudden death, then there's the more of the emotional, where if it's, a death that's, been coming for a while and you're prepared for it, then it's easier and to kind of, not easier, but to have that conversation, because it's coming. That, okay, the doctor has said this, we need to get everything, in order. But I think it really depends on what the individual is willing to accept at that point, and then say, okay, look, I understand that there's a list of 15 things that we need to do. Right now, we're only going to do 1 and 2, and then kind of leave it at that and say, okay, and then that, to kind of baby steps through it, because it can be very overwhelming when you're dealing with all the emotions. That's, just from personally what I've seen and what I've dealt with, it all depends on where that person is emotionally and what they're able to handle. And if they're not able to handle anything but things need to be signed, then you say, okay, let's do 1 and 2. And then, all right, that's done. Now let's do 3 and 4, and just help be their support for them.
Yeah, and that's great. I really appreciate that. It's that nuance of knowing who it is, the person you're working with, and how do they need to be addressed. And my mother-in-law, when my father-in-law passed away, she had a team of people that came around her. That's kind of why I got into financial planning in the first place, was because I saw this happen. I saw this happen in real life when my wife and I were just 22 years old. And it wasn't until I became a planner myself, I realized, oh my gosh, that's what I'm doing for my clients. And it was really a powerful thing for me. And my mother-in-law needed to have that step, that process of, we're going to take this one step at a time. My wife, completely different. She would be, when we lost her mother, my mother-in-law, it was, okay, we need to do these 5 things. She knew exactly what needed to happen, and we had people to help us along the way. And so you really kind of have to look at that from both perspectives. Another question we had come in was, if I have a place that I live at in the wintertime, do I need a power of attorney from that state, if it happens to be a different state, or does it work across the country? So if I've got a power of attorney here in Kansas and I move to Florida for the winter, do I need a power of attorney for Florida? That's an interesting question. And I've not dealt with that, so I don't really know the answer myself. So I don't know. If you know, that's great.
I think that's a probably question, but talk to an attorney.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah. And you sure want to take the one that you have right now and make sure it's going to work wherever you are. People do travel, and about anybody else, but I put all that on my iPad, so that if, God forbid, I should need any of that, I have it with me. But I would definitely make sure that the state that you are spending some time in will acknowledge the document you have.
Yeah, so you may need to work with that attorney there. And so, one of the other things that we do, from a resource perspective that we offer our clients is, is a tool called Marital GPS, which you can actually load all of those kinds of documents into an online vault that's data secured, but you have access, 24/7, 365 days a year. You can even provide access to loved ones, to special access to those folders too. So, well, this has been a really great discussion. I know we're right at about 45 minutes, and I appreciate the time that you all have spent. The topics we talked about today, the sandwich generation, the long-term care, difficult discussions, the death of a loved one, divorce, diversity in the workplace, and how your voice is important and it needs to be heard in the workplace as well, and knowing your value. We have a lot of resources around these pieces on our website. So if you go to our website and you can search for difficult conversations as an example, we have a great piece that talks about that difficult discussion to have. You guys talked about this a little bit earlier. We have another webinar we've done that's financial planning for caregivers. And that's really important. You touched on a little bit earlier about the importance of knowing your own personal finances, but also knowing the finances of the person you're taking care of. And so these are really important pieces. We even have an event, and Jen, I think you might even have done a similar event like this in Oklahoma on having a group of caregivers come together and talking about what that experience is going to actually look like. My wife and I did that for 11 years with my mother-in-law. And so we often share our story with other people about what that experience was like. What can you expect? And getting in groups of people, small groups, and talking about that's really powerful. As always, we love to hear from you. If you think of anything that you want us to talk about in the future, be sure to let us know by sending us an email at qa@MarinerWealthAdvisors.com. We also have a podcast called Your Life Simplified. That's another resource that's out there, and it has all types of resources like the ones we're talking about today, from investments to long-term care to getting organized, eating healthy, wine selections. I think we have one that's coming up here pretty soon. Just a variety of different topics that are out there just to simplify your life. And so we also encourage you to join us on April the 12th. We'll have Jeff Lanza here on April the 12th. He is a retired FBI agent, and I've heard him speak many times before. He's outstanding, and he will be sharing some really important things about cybersecurity and how to protect yourself when you're out there. And I think that's really important. It's all of these little things that we don't often think about when we think about taking care of our own online lives, if you will. So I encourage you to join us on the 12th. As always, thank you for being here. Let us know how we're doing. Give us feedback and let us know. If by chance we didn't get to your question today, if you put it into the question box, we should be able to get to that, and we'll come back to you after the fact on that if by chance we didn't get to that. But I do want to thank everybody for being here. This has been really great to have you all here. Look forward to seeing you all again, and also those of you that are on the call today, look forward to seeing you again soon as well. Thank you much.
Thank you.